Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be, and whether you're watching live or archived, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 20 something. I don't know, we don't keep track of this stuff. Welcome to another Nautel Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. Today we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk, and the title is Tips and Thoughts for Contract Engineering, but of course, being us, we're going to wander all over the road. We'll talk about engineering in general. Got a good friend and one of the well-known engineers from the eastern coast of the United States, Mr. Thomas Ray. Tom, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here. And excellent. We're talking about transmissions. So let me get my car in place.
Now, would that be manual or automatic?
Automatic, unfortunately. I prefer a manual. But
So there you go. Now, and in his infinite spare time, Tom also produces the Car Doctor show. So you were not just joking around with that.
no. And you do it for 7 years and you start picking things up, like with the generator yesterday, and we can talk about that later.
Yep, exactly. So, and that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about. Of course, we'll tell some more stories because I think we both have more than a few of them. We'll answer tips and questions and requests as we go along. We'll hit the mandatory housekeeping page early. As always, if you're an SBE member, the Nautel webinars do qualify for half of a recertification point under Category I of the SBE research schedule. If you're an SBE member and you're not certified, well, why not? And if you're not an SBE member, again, why not? Tom, you're an SBE member, yeah?
Yeah, I've been, gosh, I'm a CPBE. I'm a senior member of SBE. And I think this year, when not this year, but when my certification comes up, I qualify for lifetime. So.
So, as soon as you say senior, of course, automatically you think senior, you think old. But when you're talking about engineers in general, there's not a lot of us young ones. There's a few out there, and I know I've seen a couple of them on the list, and so we'll try to pull one or two of them in for opinions and ideas too. Also, folks, we do try to make this as interactive as we possibly can. So by all means, if you enter a question in the little question box on your control panel, absolutely, it pops up on my screen and we will hit it whenever we can. And if you have yeah, thanks, Marco. He tells me I'm not a young one anymore. He's not wrong either. But
Join the
we were
club.
talking about that earlier too, Marco. It's one of those, even though I can go to an SBE meeting still and sometimes be the youngest guy in the room. And yeah, once I passed 50, I don't think I got the right to use the young status anymore. Um, like aged wine. Yeah, there we go. So folks are finding the question section. Absolutely feel free to put any comments, criticisms, snark, concern, whatever. We take it all. We have fun with it. This is life is too short not to have a great time. By the same token, if you got a microphone and you're not shy, hit the little hand wavy icon up there, and I'm more than happy to open the microphone up and make you part of the conversation. I'm going to address first off, before we even get rolling, Dan Gunter asked a question and he's left the webinar at the moment, but I know he'll see it on the archive because he watches these quite a bit. And he asked a question, I'm going to read it. How on earth can I pull out scheduling some vacation time when there's only two of us doing engineering in East Alabama? Been nonstop for almost 3 months now. Everything's breaking. That post-pandemic, everything got shoved to the side for too long problem, and it's been crazy. So, Tom, you and I had just this exact discussion seconds ago about the ABIP program, the Alternative Broadcast Inspection program that a lot of states use. And you're handling a lot of states now.
Yeah, I'm handling, let's see, well, I've been handling New York for 7 years, almost 8 years now, and I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more states, one of which being Iowa. Excuse me. And there just doesn't seem to be anybody out there. I'm not one of those people historically, even when I worked for a big company like WOR. I'm not one of those people who just goes and takes off for 2 weeks. But I need to take some time here and there. For example, my daughter's recent graduation from vet school.
Mhm.
And after the webinar today, I'm driving up to Boston to get her car because it has to be inspected. So today and tomorrow, I'm kind of off duty, but I'm not. But people can always get a hold of me.
Right.
It's difficult. It's very difficult. And sometimes you're just going to have to bite the bullet and take it. And maybe, you know, talk to the other guy who's doing the work, and maybe you guys actually know somebody and you can get them to cover and explain to your clients that, hey, look, I need to take this vacation time. I'm burning out. I'm tired. Whatever the reason being, and you need to take time off. You need to take time for yourself. I tend to push. I generally work and I'm on the road Monday through Friday. On Saturday, I do the car doctor show, and on Sunday, it's like that's unless you're off the air. I tell people just don't call me, just don't bother me, because
Yep,
you're
yep.
not going to get an answer. Um, like I said, unless you're off the air, and like this weekend coming up, here in the U.S., it's the 4th of July. So we have Monday. The holiday is actually on Sunday. Monday is the legal holiday. So it's like, yeah, don't bother me on Monday. I got things to do around the house. I'm going to be painting the deck.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, just
Yeah.
thrill and
And
excitement.
I know I end up doing a lot of the same stuff, even though I've been out of the support business for officially a lot of years. Let's see, I don't know if our head of support's on there, because he likes to refer to me as his free support tech, the one that doesn't come out of his budget. So, John, if you're not here, I'm trying to turn in the title, but yeah, there you go. It still happens, and my wife just rolls her eyes. She's been dealing with it for as long as we've been together. But yeah, the phone still rings 7, 8, 9 p.m., whatever. If somebody thinks they can get a faster answer and it's urgent, then that's what they're going to do.
Right.
The big challenge is learning how to shut it off. And the thing I've found for me anyway, especially where so much of what I do is based on this thing and email, et cetera, that I almost feel more comfortable not taking to like a whole 2 week block and not looking at email or anything would drive me nuts, because all up for the last week, all I'd be thinking was, what am I going to have to deal with when I get back? Even with somebody covering for you, there's going to be a pile.
Oh, no
So yeah,
kidding. And when you get back, that's the only thing you're going to be doing is answering emails for the next week or so.
oh yeah. No, sometimes it takes 2 weeks to catch up from a week off. So it's a challenge. There's no question. And as we get hit closer to what I call critical mass, if we're already past critical mass in some markets. I mean, like you said, you're covering Iowa now for ABIP. I mean, Iowa is not next door to New York, New Jersey.
Not at all. Not at
You know,
all.
not.
Well, let's see. From here, there's an airport about 10 minutes from my house, but you can't get there from here.
Hmm.
And the last time I went out there, I flew into Minneapolis because it was a
Yeah.
3-hour flight from Newark down in Jersey, which is about an hour and a half from the house.
Hmm.
Um, if I had flown into Des Moines, it would have been an 11-hour flight,
Yeah.
with layovers and everything. It was like, no, I don't think so. Let's just take the direct flight and I'll drive and see some of the countryside.
Right. Well, and I mean, 2.5 hours from MSP, and you're already into Sioux Falls, or Sioux City rather. So yeah, I
Right.
mean, it's not that bad a drive. Got a quick question and this is one that I can't answer really, but I see Marco's here and I see a few other folks from Canada. So Gordon's asking Canadian hourly rates for contract engineers in radio broadcast. And if anybody, of course, I work primarily with Tom and US based folks.
Mhm.
And I know in the US, it's very, very market sensitive. I mean, a contract engineer in say Mobile, Alabama, will charge a much different rate than one in New York City or Chicago would, for example.
Well, even here in New York State, if you go up near the Canadian border, up in Watertown and up in Ogdensburg and up in that part, that's a completely different rate than for me to walk into New York City, just because up there they can't afford it.
Right. And so there's a good question for you before we even get rolling. Do you have graduated rate schedule, like depending on the market and the station, or how do you work stuff like that?
Well, when I work with somebody, when somebody calls and they're looking for assistance, we start talking. I'm not one of these guys. I don't pull out the rate card. I say, look, here's what I typically charge. Here's the range I typically charge. So let's talk about what you can afford. Um, and I've had a couple people, well, I can't even afford your lowest rate. Well, there's a reason it's a lowest rate. There's insurance, there's gas, and I tend to like to charge a daily rate because
Hmm.
most things I do aren't a 2 hour job. It's going to take me primarily most of the day. But when I do that, I don't charge mileage. I don't charge travel time because the travel time is included.
Hmm.
And I found that's a better way to do it from the simple standpoint because there are a lot of people that when they get the invoice, all of a sudden there's travel billed, and well, what are you billing me for travel time for? Well, because that's time I'm not helping somebody else.
Right.
Um, and some people have a hard time understanding that. And it's like, look, if you have a generator at the site and you call the generator company, or your air conditioning, you call the air conditioning company. The first thing that happens when that guy opens the door on the vehicle to come to your place is the billing starts.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
why should we be different?
Right.
It's the same thing for us. you know,
Exactly. I mean, the parallel that I use in a lot of cases is, and I pick plumber just because that's what I've got a little familiarity with. But I mean, when I call a plumber on a weekend, that clock started ticking about the second he hung up the phone.
yep,
And
exactly.
I mean, if he comes out on an emergency call, you are absolutely going to pay the transportation and what I call the inconvenience fee, if you will. So yeah, that's a good point. And getting back to what Dan had said, I'm going to I'll reach out to Dan by email because I know a couple of contract guys around that area, not necessarily in it, that he might be able to strike up some deals with too. So that's that's the other thing is just getting to know who's around. And on that note, let's get to what we're going to talk about today, seeing as we've already gone a quarter of the way through it. Um, but that's one of the things, and of course, so the benefit to all this stuff is I create these webinars the morning of. So the guy I've got sitting in the co-pilot seat today, well, the pilot seat, I tend to, be the guy. I'm the navigator, if anything. But so Tom's doing this cold. He's had no prep time, so there you go. Any blame on that? Just straight on to me. But yeah, it makes it a whole lot more spontaneous, if nothing else.
Hey, it's more
So
fun.
yeah, and this is the kind of thing we'll talk about. There's a question down here about insurance, and we'll hit that in a page or two. Talking about contract engineers, how do you find, and just all kinds of stuff like that. And one of the first things I wondered was, if I was a station manager, how do I make the call on whether I keep a staff engineer or whether I work on a contract? I mean, I guess part of it comes back to who's available for contract engineer, but you kind of got to do some research before you just ad hoc let go all your staff engineers, don't you?
Yeah, you got to take a look. You've got to see what's required in your environment. I mean, if you're doing a lot of remote broadcasts, if you have older equipment that tends to break down, if you've got several stations, for example, and you've got a lot going on between the stations, and that staff engineer is constantly doing things, you need your staff engineer,
Hmm.
because the contract guy's not going to be there like that. Um,
Right.
and yeah, if you want me to do a remote, that's great. I'll be happy to come out and do the remote. But if your transmitter blows up in the middle of the remote, well, guess what? I'm not going to fix.
Hmm.
You're going to make a decision at that point and tell me what you want me to do.
Right. And
Um,
that's one of the things that I keep coming back to folks with, especially folks who are in a staff engineering position, is that it's critical to make yourself part of the management team. Document what you're doing and let the owners know, because if all they know is that they can't find you during the day because you're either hidden back in the engineering shop or out at the transmitter site, then all they can go by is whether or not everything's working. And if it's all working, then what do they need you for? Well, they need you because you're keeping it all working. But if they don't know that,
right. Well,
so
I'll go back to when I started with WOR. We people who know me and know my background know that we moved the transmitter site, we moved the studios. But when I started there, we had the original facility and it was running old Continental transmitters. The antenna system needed to be gone through, and we did that. And basically, for like the first 6 months I was there, I was at the transmitter site at least 3 days of the week. And people were wondering. I'd come in for a manager's meeting, and um, finally the general manager said to me, you know what, we'd like to do a tour of the transmitter site. And I went, great. So I mean, the sales department, everybody came out to the transmitter site, and they just kind of looked around. And huh?
hmm. Hmm.
They don't realize what happened,
Right.
or what happens out there. And another uh, story I like, not really a story, but many years ago, when I was working in Connecticut, we had a snowstorm and I wanted to go up to the transmitter. Now we had a transmitter, it was on a mountain, it was a residential area, so it wasn't like it was
Hmm.
desolate. But I had to go through the town I grew up in where my father lived, and I called him up. I said, "You want to go for a ride?" He goes, "Where?" I said, "To the transmitter." He said, "Okay." So we went
Hmm.
up there and we walked in, and there's this 50,000 watt two continental transmitters, and there was a 25,000 watt FM next door, and a television station was also in the building, and there's their transmitter. He just stood there and he says, "And you know how to fix this stuff?" "Oh yeah, this is what I do,
Yep,
Dad."
yep.
Holy, he didn't realize, he didn't know.
Yeah. And that I think is the big thing. I mean, I got a call from an owner once asking me for a recommendation for an engineer, and we don't get these calls a lot, but we do get them on occasion. And so I said, well, yeah, I can probably pick something. What do you got for a transmitter? I don't know. I just bought this station 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, well, have you been out to the transmitter site? Well, no. Do you know where it is? Not really. And it's like, as an owner, you probably should take a little more interest, but that's not my job to judge. The point is that if, as an engineer, if you're not involving management and ownership, even if it's not, I mean, dragging them out to the site for a barbecue is just awesome because it makes the whole staff part of the facility.
Hmm.
And everybody when they see the big tall tower, it gets a little impressed. But when you open the door and you hear fans going, or you see something big, a wall of blinking lights, it could be anything, whether it's visual, audio, whatever. I mean, it's huge. So absolutely, that's a good thing.
Well, we had
And
built we had built the new WR transmitter site, and then Hurricane Sandy came along, and you couldn't get into Manhattan.
hmm
Um, but I had a bunch of operators that lived in New Jersey, and I called them all up and I said, "Guess what? You're coming to the transmitter to operate the station." They went, "Huh?" I said, "Yep. Here's where you find it. Come on out." And every single one of them walked in the door, and the first thing you saw the two transmitters, the backs of them, and you saw the transmission line, 3.5 inch transmission line, and they just stood there. Huh?
yeah,
I
that's
said,
a
"Yeah,
lot of shiny stuff.
you see those big things making noise over there? Yeah, kind of ignore them. Here's the remote control that you're used to seeing, and
Hmm.
this is what you're controlling, and this is what you're doing, and you're taking readings, and at that point they were actually switching audio because we were operating out of a temporary facility someplace else. So they were
Hmm.
actually running the board at the transmitter site, and they had no clue. They had
Yeah.
no clue. But many years ago, my wife worked for Lego,
Hmm.
and they used to put on these really big fancy holiday parties. So you'd go there and you'd sit at the table with, here's the Lego employees, and here's the guys who their wife works for Lego, and now what? So we start talking, and they say, "Well, what do you do?" "Well, I'm chief engineer of, at that time, WTIC." "Well, what's that mean?" "Well," and I thought for a minute and I said, let me put it to you as an analogy. I said,
Hmm.
what I do is I take care of the transmitter, I take care of the studio equipment. I said, in the studio, you've got the people who do production, they make the product. I says, I'm the shipping and receiving department. I get stuff out, I take stuff in. We run Rush Limbaugh, I pull that in, and then we ship it out again so you hear it. And all of a sudden it
Hmm.
clicked it made sense what I did.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the challenge sometimes is bringing it to an analogy that people that don't speak volts, ohms, and watts can understand sometimes. Andy Lowe made a good point here. Anytime he gets called in to do anything beyond 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, the last thing he does before he leaves is send an email to the PD and the GM. And so there you go. You've already proved that number one, I'm out doing this stuff, what
Yep.
I did, and protecting your investment, so to speak. So that's a really good idea, Andy. Appreciate that. And Andy, I'm going to open your mic in a little bit, not just yet, but one of your pictures is featured, and we're going to talk about that in the war stories section. So I did get a request from Sean earlier about how do you find a contract engineer. Sean's in Indiana, and obviously, and he'd mentioned this one because everybody, well, I say everybody, maybe everybody doesn't know that the SBE maintains an active contract and consulting engineer directory. But absolutely it does. So that's one good start. Beyond that, where's some places you could go? I mean, obviously Facebook, the broadcast lists, there's broadcastengineering.info. Barry Michigan's radiolists.net. But is there anything else I'm missing, Tom, that you can think of?
Well, a lot of times there's word of mouth. You like to think competitors don't talk, but they actually do. So, call the general manager or call your competitor or call somebody else in town and say, gee, who's doing your technical work? We're looking for somebody. In my case, I have a website, and I think it was last month. Yeah, I think it was last month. I got a phone call. I got a phone call from a local college. Um, they were looking for somebody to come in and just evaluate their operation and evaluate their station, because they thought they were kind of doing things from the Stone Age, and
Mhm.
actually they weren't. There were a couple things they could have improved, and I told them what I would charge for that, and they actually brought it up to their college minimum, which was a little higher than what I would normally charge, and that's what they paid me. Hey,
Mhm.
okay, you want to pay me more? That's great.
Yeah.
But they found me online. They went looking for a broadcast engineer in the area, and that's how they found me.
Oh,
So,
cool. And I mean, I know I sent you one not too long ago where they called me and it's like, well, who do you know in that area that does engineering? And I was like, well, there's this guy. I mean, I hear he's okay. So, and
yep.
gave me your contact info. And I'll do the same thing for Sean because I know a few guys in his general vicinity.
Hmm.
And some he may know, some he may not. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. And worth noting that Sean is an engineer full time, so this is, a good way. He's looking at setting up some backup, so he's doing some service for his companies, and that's a good deal.
But
Um,
I'm glad you brought that up, because you can always call the vendors. You can always call Jeff at Nautel. You can always call, let's talk transmitters, Gates area. You can call BE. You can call Axia. You can call anybody and say, hey, look, we're looking to do this. Who do you know in close to the area that maybe
mhm.
knows your console system or knows your transmitter line?
Yeah.
Um, and that's good too. That's typically that's considered word of mouth, but still,
Hmm.
it's good. It's good information, because the vendors tend to know who's buying the stuff and who's working on the stuff.
Right. And if nothing else, most of us, at least with a few keystrokes, can go through our database and get a rough geographic idea. I mean, it sometimes it might take a little hunting and pecking. Tim Barry from Knoxville mentions that I've done it for him once or twice too, and absolutely. Although I think Tim's introduced me to more engineers down that neck of the woods than I have him, but definitely yeah, it's one of those little bits of information that we do happen to come across. So first things first, and I say first things, as we said earlier, the rate card's not the first thing you flip out, but as a rule, especially these days, as we see more and more lawyers involved in what we do, it's a good idea to have some sort of agreement for anybody that you're going to work with, especially when you consider the liabilities involved with what we do. Both physical and to equipment and to the revenue source of the station, et cetera, and so on. So this is an excerpt from the sample contract, and somebody had asked about this in the advanced questions. So Dan had asked that as well, Dan Gunter. So Dan, if you go to sbe.org and click under resources, there's a section called Contracting Consulting Engineers. And if you click on that, it won't take you to this. You have to send an email to Scott Jones, but his contact info's there. And if you send the email in, you can get a copy of this. I sent the email in requesting this at 8:30 this morning, Indiana time, and had an answer back at 8:45.
Yep,
So, I mean,
that's good about that.
yeah, oh, he's a wizard, amazing. I know Wayne Pacina's in the audience, so, Wayne's president of the SBE. Thanks for joining us, Wayne. We missed you last week, by the way, but you're forgiven. Anyway, so yeah, give Scott a pat in the back and tell him attaboy, because definitely he's an awesome resource. But there is a contract there, a sample contract, and I know you've got one. So what kind of things would you suggest for somebody who's looking at putting together some kind of contract, maybe for the first time?
But well, first thing I'd recommend, Jeff, is they look through this example from SBE, because I use the SBE's contract. Um, And just because it's written down there on paper doesn't mean that that's the final version. It depends on the station, depends on their needs, and depends on what some of the legal eagles want to see. So very often when I put a contract out with somebody, we sit there and we go through it and we strike a couple of words and we add a couple of words and we strike this and we add that. And but basically, you want a term. So we start today, we're going to end tomorrow, or whatever the
Mhm.
term is. Um, and here's what I'm called, here's what you're called, and here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to take care of the transmitter, I'll take care of your studios, I'll wire the chair with high voltage for the guy who's on the air so you can just hit the button in your office, whatever. Um, and well, here's what you're going to do for me. Now, you're going to pay me, and you're going to pay me within 30 days, 20 days, whatever your term is. Maybe it's cash up front, maybe the guy you're talking to is known not to have good credit. Um, yeah, you define an emergency. That's a big one. So people aren't calling you at all hours of the day and night just because, gee, I go back to the days of cart machines. Cart machines not working, and that meant the little stoplight didn't come on. So you drive into the station just to replace a light bulb, and it was like, really? It's Saturday night.
Mhm.
you know define what you're going to do, define what an emergency is, and this is a two-way street, so you have to talk. You talk, you're not dictating. I go into a station and we have a conversation. I have a new client. I was actually recommended by somebody else because they met this guy, and um, he didn't have the time to take them on, so he says, "Why don't you call Tom and see if Tom will do it?" And I went to see them, and they're nice people. We sat around for 2 hours, drinking coffee and just shooting the bull and learning about each other. And I said, "Yeah, I'll take care of what you need," which was good because 2 weeks later, somebody dumped coffee into an old radio mixer console right on the mic pots.
Ooh.
So I've got a couple of those modules up. Thankfully, they had a couple of spares, but I've got those modules upstairs. I got to put them in the sink and give them a bath. Um, but that's how I do things. I go in and we have a chat. If somebody calls me, like this college that called me, I says, okay, here's what I can do. Here's what I recommend. I says, if you'd like, I'll give you names of a couple other people. You can call them. And they went, really? I said, yeah. I says, I said, I'd like the business, but it's, maybe I'm not your guy. Maybe I'm
Mhm.
not.
Right.
Um, and they kind of like that attitude. And we chatted. And like I said, they paid me more than what I would normally charge. And they were more than thrilled with the report I gave them. I mean, they expected a page or two. I wrote 10 pages. I went up
Mhm.
one side this place and down the other, including the fact that thankfully they did not have a tower registration number because they didn't need it, which was good because the
Right.
tower was green and white. It was like, I looked at the
Nice.
tower, I'm like, excuse me.
Yeah. I had one station owner call once, and we were just chatting about this, that, and the other thing about a new transmitter purchase. And we get near the end of the call, and at this point, we're just, talking about radio in general. And he mentioned that he was having a problem because one of the local HOAs had basically started a petition, and they wanted his tower painted sky blue so it blended in.
Nice.
It's a 300-foot tower on the approach path to an airport.
Not going to happen. Show them your antenna structure registration at that point, because that shows what color it can be painted or will be
He,
painted.
they had a big old lawyer came to him, and he sent a nice little response back and with the FAA's phone number and said, call these folks and ask them what they think of that idea. Um,
I love it. Oh my God.
Now, Curtis Stefan has asked if you have a contract, either being contract or full-time employee, how often do you think you should renegotiate it? And so, do you do yours on a regular basis, or is it just as needed to change?
Well, usually is when I start out, a new client, we'll make it for a year. We'll agree to
Mhm.
make it for a year. Let's see how it works.
Right.
If it's working out well, then we renegotiate it. Maybe the rate goes up, maybe it stays the same, and then we'll make it maybe for 2 years or three
Hmm.
years. Um, and you try to be fair. Uh, gas prices are up, so I would expect, and some owners wouldn't, but I would expect to have a little bump in increase because I don't charge separate travel.
Right.
Um, and at that point, if somebody starts balking at that, well, it's like, okay, well, you want to pay me separate for travel? And they go, well, what do you mean? Well, that's
Hmm.
included in your contract. And have you been to the gas pump lately? Well, yeah, well, and then they get the picture.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I make it for an initial term, usually of about a year, and then we sit down and have a discussion at the end of a year and go, this is due for renewal. And um, a lot of contracts like this one from SBE, I believe there's an auto renewal in it. But you can strike that auto renewal. You can extend the auto renewal. You can put an escalator in the auto renewal. I mean, if you rent tower
Hmm.
space, every tower contract has at least a 5% escalation per year. So
Right. Right.
there's all kinds of ways you can do it.
Hmm.
And if you have a local lawyer, or especially if you have a lawyer who's a friend, even better. Run it by him before it's a final set in stone document, just to make sure you're not going to get yourself in trouble.
Right. And as a note, this is, as I said, a sample contract that the SPE provides. I'm not going to link the whole one because obviously go to the SPE for that. It is a member service. So if you're not an SPE member, there's some incentive to join.
Mhm.
Tell you what, I'm going to at some point just say, tell him Jeff sent you and see what we do for a membership drive. But of course, could be scaring them all away too. One note about this, it was created by Chris Imlay, who's the general counsel for the SBE. Did I read somewhere he's retiring, or is that, I mean, I've seen so many, we're all getting older. Everybody's retiring, seems like that.
Yeah, he's going to retire from SBE this year. He handles a couple of my smaller clients, so he's going to keep some of the smaller clients because now he's
Oh,
having fun.
yeah.
But
Chris has been around for quite a while too.
yeah, and he's good people.
Yeah.
But he's SBE does take up a good portion of his time, so he's like like he told me, he says he has a deal with the wife. She'll stay married to him if he gives up the bigger clients.
Sometimes you have to make the compromises, and it was also done in with input from Chip Morgan, contractor,
That's
consulting
Yep.
engineers, Sacramento. I looked it up while we were talking, so because that was bugging us during the preamble. Neither one of us, we both locked up and couldn't remember. Back on the concept of updating management when you're to let them know, again, if you're a staff engineer, the value of what you're actually the service you're providing. And Sean has mentioned that he's got one far off transmitter site where the visits aren't that frequent. So after every visit, he sends them an email with the subject, a summary of visit that tells them specifically what he did, what he didn't do, and what parts or service it needs for the future. So ongoing type of maintenance requirements. So
And to
again,
that, I would add, if you've got some ongoing stuff, especially something that you think management's gonna sit there and go, you don't really need to do that. Take some pictures and include those pictures in the note.
yeah.
Because a picture says 1,000 words, and if you show them that the generator's leaking oil like a sieve, well, now they got to do
Hmm.
something about it.
Yep, exactly. And that's the sort of thing, again, making yourself part of the management. So the coolest thing ever, I bought a truck not too long ago from a local dealer, and that was fine. I've been in there once, was less than thrilled with their service experience. So when I bought my wife's car last year, we bought that at a different dealer, same make. They're both Chevs for that, but that's we're not getting into the Chev Ford discussion today. Um, However, the dealer we bought her car from, I've been just absolutely enthralled. I mean, to the point where now my truck goes to that dealership, and I guarantee my next car will come from there. So I took the truck in for an oil change, and I wanted them to look at one other thing. And so we both go in together, and then I leave the truck, we jump in her car, and we go off and do some groceries and et cetera and so on. But while we're gone, I get a text, and the text is from the dealership, and it's got a link to a video. So I click on the link, and she is walked around my vehicle, showing me everything they check on their 25-point inspection, explaining what she's seeing, and telling me, the things that this is fine right now, but probably should be addressed in 6 to 8 months. This is great. We don't need to touch this. This really probably should be addressed. If you want us to do it, it'll cost this much. Just text back yes or no. And that's how they did it. So I got this little video, and I decided I wanted the extra service because I was just so impressed by the fact that they did it. Also, I texted yes, added $80 to the bill, and I mean, got the truck half an hour later, all done. So, again, just making yourself part of the process and letting people know what's going on.
Well, I'll give you an example. I've got a station down here. It's being sold. Um, back in November. Well, the person that owns it is a physician, and you know, say what you want. My thing is physicians shouldn't, you should stick to doctoring. But anyway, um, so but for 2 years she was ignoring certain problems, and now she's selling the station, so we had to fix them. We get everything fixed, and the day of the pre-closing walkthrough, I go down there, and I'm driving to the site, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I only see 3.5 towers.
Uh-oh.
This has to be an illusion. And I pulled up on site, and oh no, the top half of one of the towers wasn't there.
Now, if I
Uh,
remember right, that was the one because you were scheduled to do a webinar with us last fall, and you called me in
yep.
a panic, said, Jeff, we have a problem. I can't make it.
Yeah,
And
exactly. That's the one.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So again, coming back to engineering, you don't really make plans that are going to be absolutely cast in concrete sometimes.
but I picked up the phone. I called a structural engineer I know. I called a tower company I know. I called a good lawyer that I know in the area who can work with the town. And then I called the owner and told her what was going on. I said, you need to come out here. I said,
Mhm.
you need to come out. And she did, because whenever you tell her something, she fights it.
Yeah.
Um, and she came out, and I said, look, I contacted this guy. Here's who he is. Here's what he's done. This guy designed the top of the World Trade Center. And she's like, okay. I said, here's the tower company we've used in the past. They do great work. Okay. Here's a lawyer. Well, I have a lawyer. Okay, but does he work with towns in specific, in real estate dealings? And well, no. I said, this guy does. I said, I used him at WOR. Oh, and all of a sudden it became not a non-issue.
Yeah.
And she wanted to negotiate pricing and such. Okay, that's fine. You're the owner. Um,
Mhm.
but she became very comfortable all of a sudden with the team.
Right.
And I told her, look, I says, we're all here to make a dollar, but we're not here to hurt you. We're here to
Right.
help you. We need to get this station to the point of being sold.
Hmm.
We're not here to nickel and dime you to death. We're here to get you to that point.
Right.
And everything's been great since then.
Cool.
And the tower's rebuilt, and now we're on the path to getting this done.
And that sort of leads into this slide, and this is again part of that contract, and the paragraph specifies that, well, in this case, I mean, some of the restrictions with respect to carrying insurance, supplying tools, and you're not going to buy anything for the station without their say so. And again, that will vary from one station to the next.
Hmm.
I mean, I've got contract guys who are authorized to spend upwards of two, three, $4,000 for the station, or more or less. I've got one or two that the authorization, and they're trusted to the point where it's basically whatever they say goes. Um, so I know you need to fix that, but and Brady asked this as well. For insurance, what would you consider a minimum, and what's your preference?
I carry both X. Right, I'm pulling a blank on it. Um, well, accidental loss.
Hmm.
Right on the tip
Oh,
of my tongue.
liability
Like,
type stuff.
well, I carry liability, and I also carry errors and omissions. That's what I
Ah,
was looking
gotcha.
for.
Yep, yep.
Um, and I carry 5 million.
Okay.
Because here in the New York City area, you typically can't walk on most properties without a $5 million insurance policy.
Hmm. And I
Uh,
know depending where you are, that will vary.
Right. And depending, if somebody rents a tower, the tower company may have an amount in mind. So you'd have to do that. I mean, I started with 2 million.
Hmm.
And then I had a client that we moved to a different site, and they required 5, and it was like, okay, fine. It wasn't that much more to go to 5. So,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, once you've got it, how much you have is almost just a matter of degree. So, but that brings up a good point. Like, one of the things I've discovered over the years is that a lot of state organizations, universities, government facilities, whatever, will have very specific requirements, and that's almost I found a good starting point, because if the
mhm.
universities in this state require 2 million, then if you've got 2 million, you're pretty much covered for anything at a rough guess.
Right. And like in New York City, I do have a client who's up in 4 Times Square, but I do stuff for him. I'm doing it in his room. I'm not dealing with the antennas or the roof of the building. If I had to go
Hmm.
up on the roof of the building and deal with the antennas, they require 10 million, and down at World Trade, I believe it's 20 million.
Okay.
So,
So,
if I had to do something like that, I'd have to up the policy, and obviously there's a significant dollar amount that has to be upped at that point. So,
yeah. Now, you'd mentioned also errors and omissions, tell me if I got this right, and I may have it totally wrong, and this would be a good point to correct me because I don't mess with this stuff too much. We have people that handle all this stuff for me, which is a really good thing because there are some things I should not be allowed to do. Um, Errors and omissions is primarily if you do design and layout type stuff where you could forget something basically that causes loss of use or loss of whatever. Is that
right. Well, in this case, it would be also if you're installing a transmitter or installing a console and you forget something.
okay?
And you're right. If it's something that can cause damage and cause them not to have full use of their facility, um, so you do need the error. You should get the errors and omissions because then you're covered just in case. Because you don't want you go to put a transmitter in. You tell the guy it's going to take me 4 hours, and they only have one transmitter, and they're not keeping that transmitter. So now they're off the air, and now you go to put the thing in and say, I forgot this.
Yeah.
Well, now they're off the air another 2 days, and now they're going to hit you with a bill for the revenue lost. So now what are you going to do?
Right.
Um,
And that's a really good point, though, because I'd never thought that, like, typically errors and omissions, you think of it as applying to design engineers, whether you're designing structures, whether you're designing facilities. So having it apply to installations that's a big deal because that's something that almost everybody does at some point.
right, and what's interesting is the SBE does offer an insurance policy, if you remember, with errors and omissions and liability. Uh, they did not when I started doing what I'm doing. So I went to a local insurance agent and said, well, we sat down and had a chat, and they said, what do you do? And I went, got an hour? And I started listing what I do, and they looked at me and they went, "You're kidding." I'm not kidding. Really,
Mhm.
seriously, this is what I do. Um, and they ended up getting the policy through Lloyd's of London because they just couldn't
Okay.
find anybody who understood what I did.
Right.
Um, and it was interesting because when SBE went to their current insurance policy, they actually called me. They said, we're having trouble finding somebody. What are you doing? And I went, here's what I'm doing. And I put them in touch with our agent, and who put them in touch with somebody else. And next thing you know, it's pretty much the same policy I carry.
Hmm. And there's another good point. Now, if you're an employee of the station, that insurance is typically carried by the station itself. But
Correct.
in some cases, there's a fine line between employee and contractor, and that can vary state to state a little bit how that's defined, correct?
Well, actually, here in the U.S., there's an IRS definition of a
Okay.
contractor and an employee.
Hmm.
And basically, what it boils down to is a contract engineer comes and goes as he pleases. There's no real set schedule. I mean, unless you agree to it, if Jeff says, "Hey, we're doing this webinar at noon. Can you be there at 11:45?" Hey, yeah, okay, Jeff, I'll be here at 11:45.
Hmm.
Um, that's a little different than if I'm an employee of Nautel and Jeff's my boss because Jeff says, "You know what? We're doing this webinar. Be there at 11:45." Big
Yep.
difference. Um, and that's what really defines it. If I can come and go as I please, if I maintain my own tools, if I bill you on a monthly basis, there's a whole category of stuff that makes that definition. That a typical employee is required to be on site at specific times, is required, maybe required to be on call. Which is something else. Getting back to the contract, will you be called for emergencies? Um, and the employer usually hands you a check. It's salaried. Here's the amount every month, and there's benefits that come with that, and maybe there's a company car, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh yes, you get 2 or 3 weeks vacation time, and use it or lose it,
Hmm.
and and that's basically the definition between the two.
Okay. And so that's again something and remember we've got listeners from all over, viewers I guess too. This see my radio background versus television. People can actually watch this stuff. Who knew?
Wait a minute.
But
Okay, that's better.
There you go. But yeah, we've got people tuning in from all over. So definitely, as Tom said, in the U.S. the IRS covers it. In Canada, I think it's mostly covered under the Canada Revenue Agency, the Canadian version of the IRS.
Hmm.
But definitely for wherever you happen to be, you'd want to look that up because it can make a difference in whether you do or don't need insurance and in what kind. And Eric had asked, and by the way, Eric complimented your nice WOR mic flag, Tom. But Eric wanted to know recommendations for insurance providers specific to errors and omission.
Go find a business insurance agent in your area and talk to them. Mine, I believe, is through the Hartford. But talk to a good insurance agent, and if you don't, if you're having trouble finding one, call the local chamber of commerce. They can put you in touch with somebody. That's how I started with mine. As I called the local chamber, and off I went. And, before the Obamacare Act, the Affordable Care Act, I had my insurance policy through the local chamber of commerce because they offered one, and it was very similar to what I had at WOR before I left. So
Very good. Moving forward a little bit, beyond the paperwork, we actually occasionally have to fix stuff.
come
And
on, that's no fun.
I know, really. I mean, I'm the transmitter guy. Hey, just buy a new one. It's all good. I'm happy to sell it to you too. Uh, okay, there, marketing guys. That was my sales plug. You heard it. It's recorded and everything. But and Dan brings up point the issue of whether or not you qualify by law as a statutory employee is also important to know if you get injured, as that gets into the area of workman's compensation, the owner's general liability, or your own insurance with respect to who covers it.
Right. Well,
And
here in New York, yeah, I'm a sole proprietor LLC,
mhm.
and I'm it. I'm the chief cook, bottle washer. I write the checks. I clean the toilet. You name it, I do it.
So
There's nobody else. And
friend
in
of
that
mine,
case, workers' comp is not required.
right, friend in Pennsylvania just got a letter telling him that his unemployment insurance claim was denied, and he's also a sole employee, sole proprietor LLC, and he's been in business 27 years. He's like, wow, how did I get unemployed? I'm still here, it's still working. But anyway, that's a whole different topic. But so what are the kind of things, I mean, for some of us, like for me, obviously in the northern part of the world, this is one of my truck toolboxes, and that's the one that's basically the get me out of the hole I shouldn't have got myself into box. But what kind of things do you throw in your vehicle? And do you do four-wheel drive or regular car, or how do you get to some of the uglier sites?
Well, I've got a Ford Escape, which is all-wheel drive, which is good for most terrain. I do have a couple of sites that are, well, when winter comes, you ain't getting up there. The only way to get
Hmm.
up there is to go find someone with either a snowcat or a snowmobile or some way to get you up there. Um, but for the most part, in the car, I carry uh, a general toolkit with, screwdriver, the typical screwdrivers, wrenches, pliers, cutters, strippers. Then you get the specialized stuff, the RJ45 crimpers, the RG6 connection crimpers, the compression connection crimpers, the RG11 compression connection crimpers. I've got a complete bag that's just full of wrenches because
Hmm.
you never know what you're going to get into.
Right.
I carry a spectrum analyzer, voltmeter, a an IR thermometer, a amp probe.
So I
Um,
show this guy off every single webinar, it feels like, and it seems wrong not to do it right now, but IR thermometer.
there you go.
Yeah,
It's a good
and then
thing.
my little FLIR infrared camera is the coolest thing ever.
I love that. That's great. But let's see. I also carry. What else do I carry? Oh yeah, I carry a couple label makers. One specifically for cables, and one
Hmm.
just to take a label and splatter it on something saying here's the IP address.
Right.
Um, I carry a TDR, time domain reflectometer, which is
Oh,
also a network analyzer.
good idea.
So because I show up at an AM site, I don't know what I'm getting into. I pull out the VNR. Done.
Hmm. Uh,
I carry a frequency counter. I mean, I, I I carry attenuators. I carry all kinds of stuff. The only thing I don't carry is an oscilloscope because I haven't found much need for that recently.
right. Now, the one thing funny that you mentioned it or glanced at it, but we got all this gear. One of the things that I see a lot in engineering toolkits, and I've got a box of them somewhere, but adapters. You know,
Ah,
N to
yes.
B and C to male to female to elbows to everything. I mean, and you can get an adapter kit from Pasternak for a couple of $100. Yeah, they're not the best quality, but
But they get
typically
you
they'll get
through.
you through in a pinch.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
I carry those. I got a big container of those.
Hmm.
Sometimes, depending on where I'm going, I'll throw a couple of jumpers in the car. The half-inch jumpers,
Yeah.
just in case. You never know.
Hmm.
I do have several different size of EIA adapters in case I have to adapt something.
Hmm.
Um, what else have I got in there? Oh yeah, I've got a cordless drill. I One of my newest toys is a cordless bandsaw,
Ooh.
which comes in real handy for getting into a site if somebody lock the lock out of the chain.
See, I've got a set of 2 foot skeleton keys, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do that too, but this is a lot easier.
yep, yep.
It also helps you, if you need to cut conduit or something, the bandsaw is just you can't beat it. I
Right.
carry files, I carry, you know, and that all fits in the escape.
Nice.
My
And that's, I think the big thing is, finding a vehicle. I walked into one facility once in Colorado and mountaintop sites, and they'd just gotten a new engineer, and he showed up in a Toyota Tercel.
Oh, jeez. Oh
And
man.
I said, "Where are we going?" And he tells me we're going to look off, and it's like, "Not in this, we're not." No,
if,
no,
if
we are certainly not.
if you like
Um,
your oil pan and catalytic converter, the answer is no.
mhm. Now, Curtis mentions that his mentor uses an old tackle box for all the connectors, and that's a
Yep.
really good point because most tackle boxes, I've got a couple of the Plano ones in my workshop, and they've got all the little pockets or not pockets, but little separated areas for
Yep.
stuff. So they're really handy like that. Curtis
Yep.
mentions that his mentor, when he gives up doing all this, he's bequeathing it to him. And you got to watch that because I mean, a lot of folks just don't leave radio willingly.
No.
Um,
No. A lot of us you have to drag out kicking and screaming.
so wouldn't be one of these webinars if we didn't talk about the safety aspect. And this is a site I walked into in the mid South. We won't disclose where, but this is what I see. And the first thing I do typically when I walk into a building anymore, especially when I haven't been in before, but probably even now, is that I stop in the doorway and just kind of look around to see what's going to bite me if I do something stupid. You know,
Exactly.
look for the things on the floor and the open panels. And I say questionable practices. I had one where to get to the back of the transmitter, the phaser was mounted on the wall off the end of the transmitter, and there was a foot and a half between the two of them. So, I'm not a really, really big guy, bigger than I used to be, but yeah, I had to turn sideways and kind of suck my belly in to get past the phaser. So
Wow.
it's like, if you want to get to the back of the transmitter, your best bet's to shut it off.
Yeah.
But so that sort of thing. What kind of scary stuff do you encounter here and there?
I walked into a site once and I was tracing something back to the breaker panel, and I got over there and I looked at this mess and I looked at it again and I went, those are open frame relays, and that's 220 volts for the tower lights.
Hmm.
I backed up. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I've also found just instead of running a transmission line between the transmitter and, so let's say, the phaser, there's just a pipe
Mhm.
hanging in midair, which
Oh,
is hot.
nice.
Yeah,
Yep.
great,
Oh,
great to
and
wrap your head
yeah.
on.
That reminds me, Marco mentioned earlier that when we were talking about familiarizing staff with the transmitter site, and he likes to take them out to the AM site and let them listen to the ATU coils singing.
Oh,
And
exactly.
yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, you go out to a tuning house and you'll find an old chair with the tuning network box sitting on it, which has holes in it. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
really? No, 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 no.
Yeah, one of
I
my maintenance ones, I've got a picture of an ATU with a bird's nest in it with eggs.
oh geez, and and recently I had a situation where well, I had somebody come out. One of the smartest guys I know came out to a site and he wanted to just double check the model number on the tower lighting controller.
Hmm.
And this was an AM site, and I said, okay, we're going to go in the gate. You don't go near the tower. Take out your camera, take a picture, and blow it up. He
Yeah.
starts walking towards the tower. I pulled him back. I said, don't do that. And he walked towards it again. I said, don't do that. And like a little kid, he reached out and went like this. And as he got about an inch from the front of the tower, it bit him hard.
Nice.
And he was,
Yeah.
yeah, you're not going to have a fingerprint on that finger for a while.
So sometimes, well, they say you can't fix stupid, but you can cauterize it.
Oh, but and I also find the AM sites with no with well, what kind of passes for fences, and it's like no, you got
Hmm.
to have these things fenced. A, it's a matter of law, but B, come
It's
on,
just safety. Yeah.
it's a hot tower.
Right. What happens if somebody, somebody who doesn't know what's there happens to wander through?
Right,
And Dan mentions having a tower crew show up for a couple of weeks to install an antenna on a tower in a Chrysler 300. So, all right, well, there you go,
really,
ready for the road. Um,
wow.
yeah, 5 foot snake skin on the floor of one of my sites, so now I fling the door open and look inside from the doorway to make sure there are no more.
Well,
Yeah, and nope rope. That's
I'll tell you a funny snake story. A friend of mine retired recently. He was the first chief engineer I worked for. He became the general manager of the station. He retired. And I remembered back to the day we installed an FM transmitter, and a month later we went up to check it out, and I pulled the back off the transmitter, and I went to hand it to him, and he was nowhere to be found. I was like, okay. And I look, and there's this snake at the bottom of the transmitter, which was obviously dead. So I
hmm.
grabbed the stick and I fished it out, and I go outside, and he is sitting in the car with his hands like this on the steering wheel, white knuckled, and he's like, "Get that snake out of here!" So he was scared to death of snakes.
Yeah.
So of course, at his retirement party, I said, "You're not going to remember this. Remember the one we installed the transmitter up on the mountain?" He goes, "Yeah." You remember what happened about a month after? He's no. And I pulled out this big stuffed snake and handed it to him. I said, "Here you go." I said,
Oh,
"He's deathly afraid of snakes," and the place broke up.
so I
He
had
didn't remember it.
years ago growing up, and the total segue, and we were getting on where I call it the 10-minute warning. We've hit the top of the hour where we're supposed to be done, so we'll finish up soon. But
Excellent.
there you go. But so a friend ran a body shop, and his one of his assistants was deathly afraid of snakes, and they got a car in. They had to pop the rear window out, and one of the guy who owned the car, one of his kids had shoved a 2 foot rubber snake in underneath the so he pops the window out and this 2 foot rubber snake just comes flying out at the guy. And I asked my buddy, I said, so where's Tom? I mean, I haven't seen him. Like, he goes, the last I saw him, he was headed up the road doing about 40 miles an hour running.
Well,
So
well, one more quick brief snake story. I helped a friend. We actually added a tower to an AM array,
mhm.
and we went out to do the measurements for the mom proof, and we went out to this tuning house number 3, and we opened the door and looked for vermin. Didn't see any. Walked in, and I pulled the J plug. And right when I
Yeah,
pulled the J plug, he went, "Get the blank out of there." And when somebody says "Get the blank out of there," I do.
yeah.
There was a rattlesnake in the corner, neither one of us saw.
Ooh, yeah.
So
I've
now I'm
been
sitting
to.
here with this J plug in my hand, and we can't turn the station back on.
Mhm.
Um, so it was owned by a church, so we called the caretaker, who showed up with everything, including a shotgun. By the time he showed up, the snake was gone, so he stood guard while we finished our work.
Yep. Tim mentioned there's no radio station on the face of the earth worth getting snake bit, and he's not wrong.
Yep.
I've been to a few sites where it's like, yep, they're one nope rope after another. I'm done with this one. Um, so this picture is kind of one of those ones I get a lot of folks send me the really good blow ups, so they're kind of cool. And Brett from South Carolina sent me this one. But definitely, when you walk into a site, especially when it's a new to you facility, you never know what you're going to expect.
Oh, exactly. And stuff like that. You look at that and go, really?
Yeah.
Or
And
this?
so now Andy's in the background now, and I gave him the heads up earlier so he wasn't, didn't choke on a sandwich when the picture came up. But He sent me this picture on a studio rebuild, and I am going to unmute his mic and let him tell the story himself. So, Andy, if I did it right, you should be ready to roll.
Yeah, no, can 5x5?
Rock and roll, good to go.
Yeah, this was a build actually. Turns out this studio I found out was from the old studio building. And the reason why they put it in this room is this was the one room in the new building that the cabinetry didn't need to be modified to fit. So this whole cabinet thing, they took it all apart piece by piece, moved it into the building, put it back together again. But yes, all of these outlets here in this one studio were all plugged into a single outlet in the wall. So
But
that
they've got
was,
a
I
surge
think that was the
protector.
reason, was the fact that you know, this was all, you know, it was perfectly set up as a studio. They liked how the studio was set up. They wanted to put it up exactly the same way in the new building. But I guess they just decided, yeah, no, we're just going to take every single outlet, daisy chain all of them together, and yeah, plug it into one outlet in the wall.
And you say
Now,
this like it's a bad thing.
I'm going to say, where's the challenge? I mean, how easy would that be to disconnect and reconnect? Now, the big question is, what was the size of the breaker it was connected to, or was it fused with a penny behind it?
I'm not actually sure. I haven't gotten through that part of the, this building has 6 circuit breaker boxes.
Mm.
So trying to actually go through, we've been doing this actually now. The outlet next to me is actually labeled as B16 because the outlet next to me goes to circuit breaker box B, plugs, you know, breaker 16. And actually now in all the breaker boxes, I've got little strips on there saying, okay, you know, breaker A is located here, B is located here, C, D, E, and F, or, you know, where they're all located. And I've just been slowly working my way up from the basement to the upper floors to figure out what's plugged into what breaker boxes. So this one I'm actually not sure. It hopefully it's pretty high, but I'm think there was one in there that actually looked a little discolored in the outlet itself.
Nice.
So that's, you know, trying to figure not going to do it again that way. That's for sure.
So my question is, when you took this out, marinara or Alfredo?
Actually, I'm sorry, I can't do tomato sauces. I'm always an Alfredo sauce. We actually do our own homemade penne Alfredo.
Nice.
Or I actually like the lighter, like olive oil, you know, vinegar type of sauces on my spaghettis. So there you go.
Dinner at Casa de Welton a couple of nights ago was Jeff's homemade garlic fettuccine with Alfredo sauce. So there you go. On that note, so we're 5 minutes past the top of the hour. Andy, thanks so much for sharing this. But you brought up one really, really good point too that gets overlooked in so many places. And as we transition through staff or whatever, or staff to contract, et cetera, and so on, labeling the darn circuit breakers, because there's nothing better than having to play guess what this breaker controls.
Well, if you have an electrical inspector coming in, you know, if you needed permits to do any of the work, they're going to require you to have those labeled.
So that's a good point. Now, on that note, we have gone a little past the top of the hour, and the goal of all of this, when you get right down to it, and we mentioned it, we hit it the high point at the beginning, talking about trying to schedule some vacation, but the real goal is so you can spend some time with your trusty assistant.
There he is.
And so Ted's expressing his opinion, I think, of how you produce the show some days. But
yeah, Ted comes down and spends the time with me during the Car Doctor show. He just curls up and goes to sleep for 5 hours. In this case, he stuck his tongue out, so obviously it was a bad show.
Either that or he's just trying to provide some comic relief. He didn't appreciate the humor. Who knows? But absolutely, Tom, I do want to thank you for spending time with us today. Before I get any further, this webinar, as with all Nautel webinars, is going to be archived. If you go to our website, click on resources and webinars, you can find it there, register for upcoming ones. We do publicize some of these things in the tips column that I put in the Waves newsletter. There was a new one out a month or so ago, give or take, and lots of online resources. I've mentioned Barry Michigan's BDR.net and radiolists.net for engineering forums. As well, there's the Facebook Broadcasting Club, the Transmitter Sites page. There's Radio Student or Station Radio Studio Facebook pages, AM, FM, you name it. You can find Tom on a lot of those. You can find on some of them. Uh, you know, Tom can give you an intelligent answer. I can provide comic relief. It's all good either way. But having said that, I definitely do, again, want to thank you very much for spending so much time with us today. It's been a lot of
Jeff, it's
fun.
been a blast. It's
And
always a pleasure.
thank you. And to you folks, thank you very, very much for your time today. And we hope to see you next time. Thanks very much. See you later. Bye now.